Rules Committee come to order, and thank you very much for joining us today for an important opportunity to continue to discuss the economic success of the United States of America and the great workers that we have. Today, the committee will consider a package of three bills, H.R. 6757, Family Savings Act of 2018, H.R. 6756, the American Innovative Act of 2018, and H.R. 6760, Protecting Family and Small Business Tax Cuts of 2018. This package has come to be known as Tax Reform 2.0, as made very aware by every member from the distinguished gentleman from the Woodlands, the young Chairman Kevin Brady. Tax Reform 2.0, as Chairman Brady will say, includes three bills that are extremely important that will help us build and continue to build upon the tremendous success that we have seen from Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. This bill includes a series of important reforms to make it easier for employers, and especially small employers, to provide retirement plans to their employees for the benefit of the worker. It also includes reforms that make it easier for employees to participate in employer-sponsored retirement plans and individual retirement arrangements, known as IRAs. Thanks to the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, businesses and families now have more money in their pockets. We've seen the stock market rise some 40%. It is a perfect time to help our families save money for their future and have retirement savings necessary to be prepared for the things that come within the path of those individuals and those families. As in my case, as the young chairman knows, a son that graduates from medical school this next year, and I need to make sure I'm prepared to make that final down payment for him. And Kevin, he gets married May the 4th. So for that impending marriage, far too many Americans in the past have struggled to save for their key life events such as retirement, emergencies, education, health care, and other important attributes of life. This package also doubles the amount of startup and organizational costs that can be expensed in the first year of operations for a small business in particular. Additionally, it provides startup businesses more flexibility in attracting capital to fund their operations during the startup phase, exempting net operating losses and general business credits generated in the early years of startup business from the limitations on use that otherwise would apply. So we're trying to encourage the American dream, which is small business to many people. Finally, Tax Reform 2.0 makes permanent the comprehensive reforms to the Internal Revenue Code of 1986 to provide tax relief and simplification of tax policy for American families, individuals, and small business that were enacted on a temporary basis. I assume that means 10 years by subtitles A and B of the Tax Code and the Jobs Act. We now have one of the most competitive tax codes on the planet. It is working. It is providing incredible opportunities, not only for American business, but also the American worker. And I have been a solid student of watching the impact all across Dallas, Texas, and the 32nd Congressional District. And I'm nothing but a hardcore supporter to say that what has happened here with this Tax Act, Mr. Chairman, has been substantially necessary. I think the Dallas Morning News reported in Dallas that no city in America has been able to gain more benefit from people who would not only see that benefit but prepare for their future. And of course, if we don't get it done, the reverse would be true. They would be hurt. So it's time to make sure that we're talking about 2.0. But before we go both to you and the distinguished gentleman from California, we're going to move directly to the ranking member, the gentleman from Massachusetts, for any opening statement. Distinguished gentleman, choose.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to welcome our witnesses. With Tax 2.0, the sequel is just as bad as the original. Your first tax scam added $2.3 trillion to the national debt to give the wealthy and big corporations huge tax cuts. 2.0 would add another $3 trillion to the debt to again reward the wealthy and the well-connected. You won't see its cost on the budget scorecard. The Republicans think they can wave a magic wand and hide the cost. They have an amendment that says this massive giveaway to the wealthy magically doesn't count. This at a time when the Treasury is already borrowing money at the rate of $5.4 billion a day. The nonpartisan CBO found recently that congressional Republicans and the Trump administration have blown a $900 billion hole in the federal budget. This deficit will increase by nearly 32% this year. A main reason for that is your horrible tax bill. The first Republican tax law reduced the Medicare trust fund by 3 years. 2.0 could trigger an automatic 4% cut in Medicare. Hundreds of billions of dollars for this program could be lost. After Republicans exploded the deficit, President Trump's chief economic advisor is now calling for new cuts to Medicare and Social Security. Are you kidding me? The first Republican tax scam temporarily limited the state and local tax deduction. 2.0 would make that permanent, undermining funding for priorities like schools, firefighters, and police officers. As bad as the policy is, this is really about politics. Your tax law is wildly unpopular. A poll commissioned by the RNC of all groups showed that 61% of respondents thought the GOP tax scam benefited, quote, large corporations and rich Americans over middle-class families, end quote. Americans worried in that poll that it will lead to cuts to programs like Medicare and Social Security. And given what the administration said, apparently rightly so under the Republicans. This after Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell proclaimed 9 months ago, and I quote, "If we can't sell this to the American people, we ought to go into another line of work," end quote. Well, with polling like what we're seeing, many members of the majority are afraid they'll be forced to do exactly what Mitch McConnell suggested after the November election. So you're trying to move this bill now so you'll have another talking point on the campaign trail. But this is not about the sales job. It is about the substance. This is bad policy, and it's going to hit the middle class the hardest while the wealthy get a windfall. I think the voters are going to see through this second scam just like they have with the first. This is going nowhere in the Senate, so my job is to be as cooperative as possible to get everybody out of here as quickly as possible. With that, I yield back my time.
I thank the gentleman for his comments. By the way, Mr. Chairman, I have kept now for some month this article that was from the New York Times. It's a small newspaper in New York that has a headline dated August the 3rd, 2018. Workers hardest hit by recession are joining in recovery. And I would quote, without objection, I'm going to enter this to the record, and I quote this: high school dropouts make up 7.2% of the labor force, and some expert doubted that they and other low-skilled workers would ever fully recover from the effects of the recession. Well, it's been done. The long duration of the recovery has pulled them back into the economy, adding jobs, and employers abound as a result of this. So I just want to say to you that whenever you hear, and I hear as accusation, that this did not work, the evidence it can even be found in the New York Times, August the 3rd. And for the 45 or 50% of Americans that are in the stock market, I think they're happy too. So we're delighted that you are here to continue to push economic growth and development. Without objection, Mike, you and the young chairman, anything you brought in writing will be entered in the record. We're delighted that you're here, and the distinguished gentleman from the Woodlands is recognized.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Chairman Sessions, Ranking Member McGovern, and members of the Rules Committee. It is an honor to testify before you today. Even though it was enacted just last December, Tax Cuts and Jobs Act has already changed the trajectory of America's economy, giving us more jobs, bigger paychecks, and historic Main Street optimism. It's critical for hardworking Americans that we keep this strong economic momentum going. That's why we followed last year's successful redesign of the tax code with Tax Reform 2.0. The three bills, Mr. Chairman, as you said, that make up Tax Reform 2.0 are designed to help families and small businesses thrive. This starts with locking in the individual and small business tax cuts from the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. For example, in Massachusetts' 2nd District, Mr. McGovern's district, that average family of four earning the median household of income of $104,000 will see a permanent tax cut each year of $2,485. The Protecting Family and Small Business Tax Cuts Act of 2018, which is sponsored by Congressman Rodney Davis, along with Congressman Mark Walker and Mark Meadows, will give American families and workers in Main Street small businesses certainty. It'll also continue to fuel the strong economic growth we've witnessed over the past year. The Tax Foundation has estimated that making the middle class and small business tax cuts permanent will create 1.5 million new jobs and increase GDP over 2%. The second part of Tax Reform 2.0 is the Promoting Family Savings Act of 2018, which is sponsored by Congressman Mike Kelly. This will help Americans save for key life events by expanding access to new and existing savings vehicles. Far too many Americans have struggled to save for key life events such as retirement, education, or unexpected emergencies. In fact, almost 40% of Americans say they wouldn't be able to cover an emergency expense of just $400. The Promoting Family Savings Act includes expanding 529 savings accounts. They give families the flexibility to use their education savings to pay for apprenticeship fees for trade schools, to cover the cost of homeschooling, and help pay off student debt. It also includes the new universal savings accounts, we call them USA accounts, which offer a fully flexible savings tool that families can use at any time that's right for them. We think this is important to draw millennials and younger workers into the saving culture earlier in life. The Promoting Family Savings Act will also help expanding families by allowing them to access their own retirement accounts on a penalty-free basis to use when welcoming a new child into the family, whether by birth or by adoption. And that's important whether you have extra medical bills, if you have a special needs child as we do, special equipment, or you're a stay-at-home parent or a working parent who simply needs more time at home with that young child. Then it will allow them to replenish those retirement accounts in the future. And the final part of Tax Reform 2.0 is the American Innovation Act. This bill, sponsored by Ways and Means Tax Policy Subcommittee Chairman Vern Buchanan, will, as you say, Chairman, help hardworking Americans move a family business from their kitchen table to their first office by allowing them to write off more of those startup costs in those early years. It'll also help America's risk takers create jobs, invest in their communities, and continuing strengthening America's economy. These three Tax Reform 2.0 bills will help ensure our code continues to allow our economy to grow, and that's why we have worked so hard on these bills, to change the culture of Washington, from one that waits an entire generation to fix a broken tax code, to one that keeps our code ahead of the pack every year by improving it. Never again will America fall so far behind our competitors as we have in the past. I'd be pleased, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, to answer any questions you might have about any of these important bills. I would like to enter into the record from the White House a statement of administrative policy in support of this package.
Thank you very much. And as the gentleman does suggest, the administration has issued their SAP, Statement of Administrative Policy, and I would read from the bottom, if H.R. 6760, H.R. 6757, H.R. 6756 were presented to the President in their current forms, his advisors would recommend that he sign the bills into law. Thank you very much, Chairman Brady. Mike, welcome to the Rules Committee. We're delighted that you're here. How's Jan?
She's well, thank you.
Good. Please
I'll
tell her
pass
I-
on
please
to
tell her
her
I said
your
hi.
inquiry. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member McGovern, and distinguished members of the Rules Committee. I appreciate the opportunity to testify on the three Ways and Means Committee bills that the Rules Committee will be considering today. It's been 8 months since the House approved a massive and unpaid-for tax bill without a single Democratic vote. That measure is a reflection of the process by which it was considered: incomplete, lopsided, and error-ridden. Since its passage, the Ways and Means Committee Democrats have identified over 100 problems with the Republicans' tax law. Today, we're considering a package that follows that same process and will yield the same outcome. Simply put, this bill adds insult to injuries. We are going to have more hearing time on this tax bill today in the Rules Committee than we had on both tax bills in the Ways and Means Committee. Independent experts have warned that this unpaid-for plan will do further significant harm to programs like Medicare and Social Security. It could trigger an automatic 4% reduction in Medicare payments, a cut of hundreds of billions of dollars for programs that are essential to American families. And I'd like to ask unanimous consent to place in a record Public Law 111-139 that substantiates that concern of the cuts to Medicare and to Social Security. And it eliminates tax incentives to help middle-class families get ahead, incentives like the state and local tax deduction for individuals. More than 45 million American families claim the SALT deduction, and a significant share of them claim more than the $10,000 threshold. My home state of California had an average SALT deduction of $18,768 in that last calculated 2016. Where I come from, the SALT deduction is a middle-class tax benefit. More than 80% of the 6.3 million Californians who utilize SALT deduction had total family incomes below $200,000. The Republicans' new tax law makes it harder for families to afford home ownership and harder for local governments to make the investments necessary and critical for their communities, infrastructure, schools, and police and fire services. It forces families to pay federal taxes on income that they had to pay in taxes to the state and local government. Plain and simple, it's double taxation and it's unfair. I'd also be remiss if I didn't mention that this bill fails to provide relief for victims of natural disasters. Year after year, we've witnessed devastation on a scale that brings thousands of families to their knees. Last year, it was fires in my district and hurricanes across Texas, Florida, and the Caribbean. This year, it's more fires in the West and more hurricanes in the Southeast. We may not be able to control the frequencies of these events, but we can give families the certainty of a helping hand in their aftermath. Most important, Tax Scam 2.0 once again demonstrates a fiscal recklessness that is an outright violation of our responsibility as stewards of the federal budget. The original Republican tax law adds $2.3 trillion to our debt. This bill doubles down on those costs to the tune of $250 billion. It's a $250 billion per year. So in less than a year, the House of Representatives will have added more than $3 trillion to our national debt. Yesterday, the small newspaper, Mr. Chairman, that you referenced in your statement, the New York Times, flagged the cost of interest as the fastest growing government expense. Quote, within a decade, more than $900 billion in interest payments will be due annually, easily outpacing spending on our defense budget as well as programs like Medicare and Medicaid. And just this afternoon, on my way here to this committee, I got a notice on my phone, I'm sure you did too, that the interest rates were raised today. So every time those interest rates raise, and we warned of this at the time of the markup, every time the interest rates go up, that number to the national debt goes up as well. So digging out of this deepening hole is not a burden that I'm willing to leave my children or my grandchildren. In closing, H.R. 6760 is nothing more than another reckless tax cut for the rich that leaves behind average, hardworking families and punishes future generations, with great emphasis on punishes future generations. We should scrap this draft and go back to the drawing board. The committee also marked up two other bills, one to address family savings and the other to encourage American innovation. Neither of these bills received the adequate committee consideration that each deserves. The committee members were forced to vote on complicated policy in the absence of hearings and in the absence of hearing from experts in these areas. This rejection of regular order has unfortunately become the new normal. Committee Democrats hold a longstanding commitment to enacting policies to ensure that our hardworking Americans have the tools they need to save for a secure retirement. It's a top priority of Ranking Member Neal, as well as the rest of our members on the dais on the Ways and Means Committee. We should be working together in a bipartisan fashion, just as our Senate colleagues did. We should hold hearings. We should learn from the experts, and we should take the time to craft meaningful and fiscally responsible legislation. Democrats believe in American innovation and entrepreneurship. Democrats support the small businesses who are the backbone of our economy. My Democratic colleagues and I would have enthusiastically and actively participated in the construction of bipartisan legislation to help small businesses deduct more of their startup costs. We're interested in helping idea incubators attract capital in the most efficient ways. But that's not the process that the majority adopted. This exercise capped off by what appears to be another dead-on-arrival reception in the Senate told us how serious the majority is about making laws. I hope we can do better than this next time. I thank you again for the invitation to testify, and I look forward to your questions.
Congressman Thompson, thank you very much. Chairman Brady, you spoke about something that perked my ears. I have not studied entirely, nor do I understand all of the attributes that are in here, even though I look forward to doing that. But you talked about what might be called a USA savings account. Do you mind delineating that and covering that portion of your testimony?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Family Savings Act does a number of key things. Helps more businesses, encourages them to offer retirement plans for their workers, and encourages workers to take them up sooner. For example, 1 out of 3 workers in a private sector company don't have access to any retirement plan. So we create incentives to do that. But we also looked hard at when Americans save. And it turns out they don't save till later in life, and often very high on the income scale. And some of those who aren't saving are the millennials. The USA accounts will allow Americans to put into account up to $2,500 a year. It will grow tax-free, and they can use it with the flexibility for what they need, whether it's saving for a house, saving for some new facility they need for their child, whatever it is, and with the ability to access that. What we know from looking at experience in other countries, as well as the millennials today, are often putting off savings. With student debt, they're postponing their house, buying a home, they're postponing starting their family. They often postpone savings for fear they'll be locked in. So the USA accounts doesn't replace other accounts. It's a new tool to be used for Americans, and more Americans will be able to use that type of account. So it's just another smart way to encourage people to save more and earlier in their life.
Great. Well, there are many parts of this that seem to be not only successful to individuals, but really successful to, in particular, younger workers by encouraging the movement of the success that business has. I've heard this all over the place in Dallas, Texas. As a matter of fact, I did an event a couple weeks ago, a manufacturing company, and the gentleman that owns the business openly said, I need 10 more employees that would make, and I pay $60,000 plus benefits. It's going begging.
You know, the other side of this, besides encouraging more younger people to save, people are working longer, you know, and so right now under current law, 70 and a half, once you pass that, you can't save more in your IRA. We changed that to allow you to continue to do that. Beyond that, we go further. Current law makes you at 70 and a half, start taking money out of your savings account and spending it, even if you don't need it, even if you need to save it. So we begin to change that. So accounts of $50,000 or less, savings account, you won't be forced to take that out. You can leave it in there and continue to grow. We hope over the years to be able to raise that threshold, again, to continue to reward people for saving and encourage them to keep saving as they work.
Now, there had been some discussion about allowing an HSA deductibility for a person that might be on Medicare. Was there any discussion in the committee about that?
Not in here, but in a package of bills we moved for the House, I want to say in the last month and a half, we had a number of forms to health savings accounts dramatically expand who can use them and how they can use those savings in there.
Great. Flexibility. Thank you, young chairman from the Woodlands who has.
Who came in with you, Mr. Chairman?
Did come in. That makes you really young.
Yes, sir.
But
At
who
30 days.
has been a star for the show for a long time. Appreciate it. Chairman
sir.
Cole?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank both of our good friends for being here, two of our very best members, and it's always an enlightening discussion. I want to start, Mr. Chairman, by congratulating you because I've seen the fruits of your good work in my district. And on the last tax bill, I've had businessmen after businessmen, I've had accountants, I've had people tell me, more rapid growth, more job creation, more investment, all spurred by the legislation that you and your committee put together last time. So we're sort of at that time around when we all sort of check the public pulse a little bit. I got the highest right track numbers for the country that I've gotten in over a decade. And a lot of people attribute it to the economic growth that I think you and your colleagues on your committee had a lot to do with. So I want to begin by thanking you for that. Now that I'm 69 years old, I was very interested in your discussion on IRAs, too.
It makes sense, though, to be able to do that.
It's making more sense by the month, Look, this is a challenging problem. I think retirement security and the encouragement of savings is really one of the most important things we do. We know we have a crisis, and it's the financial downside of a good problem to have. We just have we have a large generation retiring, and we have people living a lot longer than any actuarial tables that were devised 10, 15 years ago. It's actually what's straining entitlements, and it's something that we ought to be working on, but we ought to do it in ways that, again, as I think you're talking about doing, increase opportunities for people to get into savings earlier, if it makes sense for them, to extend it longer. Just try to give them as many options as we possibly can. So I think that's all good. I will confess that I have been busy with my own bill, which will come to fruition today, Labor, Health and Human Services and Defense. So I have not had the opportunity to dig into this as much as I would like. There is an area, and it's certainly, my intention would be, unless I were to find something that would shock me, knowing you as well as I do, to be supportive of the legislation. But I know in the last tax legislation, there were discussions about some provisions relating to Native American adoption and some other tax things, and they didn't make it into the last tax bill. I know there was going to be some effort to include some of that here. Could you enlighten me on that?
Yes, so we're continuing to work. One, thank you for being a champion to make sure throughout our whole government, including our tax code, that we don't inadvertently leave Native Americans and tribes behind in these tax incentives, whether they're for earned income, work opportunity, job training grants, programs like that. So with your permission, let me check with our team to see what we were able to do here. But I can assure you this, we've had a number of meetings on sort of scrubbing the code to make sure there's equal treatment in the United States, and I will get you back an answer.
Well, and I will commend you and your committee. You did some things to make tribal officials eligible for the Social Security efforts they've had. That was a big win for tribes, and we're very appreciative of your committee's efforts in that regard. But I would appreciate it if you would look into this and get back to me. Well, my staff and I will dig into it as well.
Great, thank you.
Would be very grateful if they could be included, particularly the child adoption issue. That is extraordinarily important to tribes.
It is. It is.
With that, Mr. Chairman, I don't want to
Tony,
take
yes,
a
Max.
lot of time, but I want to thank both my good friends for being here, and look forward as you continue to work through the process, and hopefully we can find a little more common ground than we found. I know it's tough, but I know my friend from California is serious about that when he makes that offer. So hopefully you're going to see a lot of common ground a little bit later today between our respective parties on defense and
Yes,
labor, health, and human services issue, where I expect a very substantial bipartisan vote of support. So I know we can do it, and I know you both have the capability of doing it, and I hope we can do that as we move forward.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
With that, yield back, Mr.
Chairman yields back his time. Thank you very much, Mr. McGovern.
I'm going to be true to my word, no questions.
Thank you very much. Judge Hastings?
Employees
The objection.
that urge opposition because it provides huge tax break giveaways, they say, that disproportionately benefit the wealthiest. I also, Mr. Chairman, would like to include in the record a statement of United Steelworkers on behalf of their members in opposition to this measure.
The objection.
And 137 national and 639 state and local organizations oppose, or they call it round two of the Trump GOP tax cuts to stop another giveaway to the wealthy. I would like to include that in the
The
record as
objection
well.
must be included.
And the Fraternal Order of Police are supportive in a letter to Mr. McGovern. They support on behalf of their 335,000 members. They urge the Committee on Rules to support the Graves Amendment. I've not heard from Mr. Graves. I assume he will be here, but at least I put in the record that the Fraternal Order of Police are supportive of his measure. Mr. Thompson, were you involved in the drafting of this measure?
Thank you, Mr. Hastings. No, I tried to emphasize that in my opening statement. One of the things that was absent in all the bills that we're talking about today, and the first Republican tax bill, was a complete lack of regular order. We had no hearings. We heard from no expert witnesses. That's why I mentioned that our committee members have identified over 100 problems with the bill. And I don't think and I suspect that my friends on the other side of the aisle have had issues brought before you when you go home and talk to your constituents. When you do a bill this big, the first bill in 30 years redoing the tax code, it's real hard to do it without having hearings and without hearing from experts. And there was one provision that was put in the bill that was one of my bills. And the constituents that I was carrying it for at home came to me and they said, you do know that this is costing us more money now than before the bill was passed. And it was because we didn't have a hearing. And the way the language from my bill was shoehorned into the main bill is costing small wine producers in not only my district, but any place they make wine, and just know that they make wine in every state in the United States now. And the small producers, and as you all know, if it's in one of your states, it's a small producer. They're paying more if they have cooperative warehousing agreements with other people. The person that brought to my attention paying $110,000 a month more tax liability on his warehousing of wine than before it was passed. So that is a problem, Mr. Hastings. And the other thing I'd just like to mention, Mr. Brady talked about the retirement bill, and I concur with him. This is an area where we do need to work. But we need to work cooperatively on that. We all have ideas how to improve retirement security for individuals, and we should do that. And we should also make note that this bill has a price tag of $8.6 billion. That's unpaid for. Now, that's small in comparison to the $3 trillion that's going to be added to our national debt. But as someone much smarter than me once said in this institution, you know, a billion here and a billion there, and pretty soon you're talking about real money.
Right. The measure, obviously, as is in most legislation, has some good provisions. But can you, Mr. Thompson, discuss the important bipartisan provisions that have, to my way of thinking, inexplicably been omitted?
Well, I don't think we had a chance to have a bipartisan agreement on this. The bill was written, rewritten, and rewritten again without a single hearing. It was done. I don't think all the members on their side of the aisle participated in the writing of the bill.
Is there an offset for this particular spending?
No, nothing that we're hearing today, nor the first tax bill was offset. It wasn't paid for. It's going to be a direct cost to our.
What is your position, Mr. Brady, with reference to the fact that it's not offset, and what impact, if any, will that have on the
So we take the position that you and Mr. Thompson, Mr. McGovern did when you voted to make permanent the Bush tax cuts at $3.9 trillion. We don't believe making tax relief permanent for families and small businesses should be accompanied with tax increases somewhere else.
But did you make those taxes permanent in 1.0 for corporations?
Yes, we did, and the
Well,
redesign
why
of
is it if it's
international.
good for the goose, it's not good for the gander that's in business?
Well, as you know, Senate budget rules require sunsets in certain areas. And so we decided the first thing we should do is to begin to jumpstart this economy, increase consumer confidence, investor confidence, Main Street confidence, manufacturing confidence, start to bring back homes from overseas, jobs from overseas. We've achieved exactly that. So here we are in 9 months later, back to ensure that your average family of four in your district that sees a tax cut of $1,146 can count on that in the future. And I know in Washington they consider that to be crumbs, but in truth, for families in Florida's 20th district, who together, a family of four, make $60,000, you know, another $1,100 a year those are car payments, utility payments,
Well, like you-
a number of those. So, yeah, we think they ought to be made permanent, just as you did with the Bush tax cuts.
Understood. I disagree with you. If I were going to make them permanent, I would have flipped it the other way. I would have made small businesses have permanent opportunities.
Well, if I recall, Democrats opposed this bill because they wanted the family and small business credits or cuts permanent. We're bringing that to you.
Well, let me tell you, your understanding of my congressional district and what you offer as what each person would receive. I just am coming off of a primary campaign, and like all of us, I met with countless people. I didn't meet with anybody that was touting the tax measure. And I might add, that's with Democrats or Republicans. In my congressional district, nobody was saying, oh boy, I got $1,000. And you know why? When you all talk about those kind of things, you're not taking into consideration, for example, in my congressional district, we have an affordable housing problem, and our rents have gone through the roof for working families, and so that becomes problematical. If they get the money that you say, they wind up having to pay it back. I might add the cost of fuel, other incidentals that add into the whole factor. Now, I'm not as steeped as you and Mr. Thompson and other members of the Ways and Means Committee, and I don't pretend to be. But at the very same time, I find it almost rude for Republicans to come up here and for years have been talking about the deficit, and then to come up here and add to the deficit with a measure, although, albeit, it may not go anywhere in the Senate. And I hear the chairman often of this committee touting the stock market. Man, most people in this country don't have no stock. And what happened in your 2.0 measure that just, let me give you some, for example, since passage of the 1.0, corporations already have announced more than $700 billion in stock buybacks. Good reason that the market is doing real good. Recently, Goldman Sachs projected that the U.S. companies may authorize a record number of corporate share buybacks by the end of this year, $1 trillion as a possibility. And at the same time, far too many of those corporations, and here's where you all and I part company, have laid off people. You started with Harley Davis. Trump ran around the country talking about what Harley Davidson was going to do. Harley Davidson became the poster child. And yet the company announced a nearly $700 million buyback plan, and its plan also to close a Kansas City plant, resulting in the layoff of 800 workers. ConocoPhillips, they got a big reward, $9 billion stock buyback. Wells Fargo, who probably ought to be out of business the way that they have treated their clients in the housing scam that went on. But it announced it will close 900 branches despite receiving a $3.4 billion boost. Qualcomm said they're going to lay off 1,500 workers, and they announced an $8.8 billion corporate stock buyback. Kroger, closing 14 stores, 1,500 workers. McKesson, they got $4 billion in corporate stock buybacks. Kimberly-Clark plans to cut 5,500 jobs. And I might add, in the congressional district that I serve, there are a number of mid-sized corporations that have been laying off people. And we had a candidate that was running that did not win her primary, but she borrowed from Rick Scott, our governor in the state of Florida, who's running for the U.S. Senate, his let's get to work. And he constantly talks about jobs, jobs, jobs. And this candidate said that he's correct. In Florida, you need 3 jobs in order to be able to maintain yourself. So your tax 1.0 has not helped one whit in the congressional district that I serve. And I will go with you toe-to-toe every day to tell you I know more about Ms. Johnson and Ms. Wellington and all the people that may have received what you said, and none of them are walking around talking about it. School teachers are not being paid what they need to be paid. And I could go on, and I won't, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back my time, but it's incredible that the deficit hawks became the debt and deficit doves all of a sudden. And I've been here, I've seen this thing flip back and forth, but I promise you that these corporations who do not have consciences, although Romney said they were people too, and I say the people that serve on the board ought to have consciences when they are about the business of taking advantage of workers. The other thing is wages haven't gone up. And wages haven't only not gone up. Y'all don't like to talk about it. I don't mind because I'm at the end of whatever it is in this whole scene. But we've been 10 years here. When I was talking with the AFSCME president this morning, and he's telling me about the number of people in his worker programs that are not receiving any increases in their pay. I told him, hell, I haven't had an increase in mine in 9 years. And I gather that y'all don't think that we deserve. Well, if I were to take you through the examples of how it has impacted my life, I can tell you that I went from one apartment to another back to the same price over a 7-year period of time. And that the cost of living is just incredibly difficult for a significant number of people. We don't even pay these people that work here with us in these committees. We don't pay them what they're worth, and you run around talking about trickle down. Ain't nothing going to trickle down. It didn't trickle down before, and yes, the stock market will rage on, and it will go up and it will go down, but most of the people at the bottom will go around and around and around. and you can't prove to me that that's going to be the case. You won't be here, Kevin, when the deal goes down. But just like 2.0 has, 1.0 has failed in terms of middle and low-income people, 1.0 is going to fail as well. I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. Thank you very much. Distinguished gentleman from Louisville, Texas, Dr. Michael Burgess.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to our witnesses for being here today. I wonder if I might just share a short story with you. Like many of you, I spend a lot of time on airplanes, part of my week coming and going to work. And I fly American Airlines. And right before the August recess, I was on my plane Friday night going home to the Dallas-Fort Worth airport. I went into the restroom on the plane. When I came out, there were 3 flight attendants waiting on me. And they said, "Are you Congressman Burgess?" And I'm like, "Oh, man, who wants to know?"
You're in trouble.
And I said, "Well, how can I help you?" So, "Well, we're having a union meeting." And I went, "Oh, man." And this young woman, probably in her mid-40s, said, "I live in Flower Mound, Texas. That's in your district." And I said, "Yes, ma'am. How can I help you?" And she said, "Well, I just want you to know a few things." She said, "Number one, you voted on a bill right around Christmas time, and I got a Christmas bonus that I wasn't expecting from American Airlines, about $1,000, and it was really helpful." And then later on, probably in February, there was an adjustment to my withholding, and I realized I was going to be able to not only buy a new car, but actually a much better car than I'd been looking at, because there was a difference in my monthly take-home pay. And she said, and then, because of what's happened in my 401k, I was able to borrow money to remodel my kitchen, something I've been wanting to do for 10 years. So thank you, Congressman Burgess. Your vote in December made a tremendous difference in my life. And the 2 other flight attendants who were not constituents echoed what she had related to me. So we don't oftentimes get told thank you. We don't oftentimes get told good news. We frequently hear that things that are important to people like me is one of the things that doesn't get taken into account enough up here. So I wanted to share with you, Chairman, Mr. Thompson, I wanted to share with you that my experience at the end of July. I'm glad you're doing this. I'm glad we're making this permanent and Mr. Chairman, you and I have talked about this a lot over the years, and it was if I got nothing else out of the bill that you did, the fact that it's the simplicity factor, and I've maintained for years, because I've been an advocate of a flat tax, I want to send my taxes in on a postcard. It's giving back people the time that they spend working through that shoebox full of receipts every March and April, and I do it myself, and it's a lot of time. We're giving people back not just their money, but we're giving them back their time. So if I had gotten nothing else out of the tax bill that your tax reform, first tax reform in 31 years, the gift of time back to constituents was a big one. So I am very supportive of making this permanent now and having this vote on this bill. And then you and I have talked about the changes in deductions for health expenses and how the Affordable Care Act had hurt people by raising that level up.
Yeah.
You know, in 1986, it jumped up to 7.5% of your adjusted gross income. And then in 2010, it jumped up to 10%. So it's like we were going after the sickest and the poorest people with that healthcare law. So we may not have repealed all of Obamacare, but this is a part that we have walked back. And I sometimes liken it to the Johnny Cash song, "I stole it one piece at a time." So slowly but surely, we're walking back some of the worst excesses with getting rid of the individual mandate, which you did in your bill in December, fixing this problem with the medical deductions. These are positive steps, and returning to people their time. For people who are ill, we're giving them back a little bit of their money, and I'd say that's a good thing. And then one other thing that I just have to bring up, and it falls into the category of my loss is your gain. Sitting behind you is Gary Andres, and he was our staff director on Energy and Commerce, and he's the best darn staff director we ever had. We miss him
can't
on
have him back.
we miss him on Energy and Commerce, and I know that's why you're able to do such good work, is because you've got such good staff
It
behind you.
is. Thank you, Dr. Burch. And thank you, your championship on medical expenses. So a no vote will punish families, especially seniors, who have high medical costs and expenses. And so we extend, that was an Obamacare tax. It really hurt seniors. So we delay that tax for another, that higher threshold for another 2 years, making it easier for families to afford those high costs. And that simplicity, think about this, 31 million more Americans will be able to file without having to itemize their deductions. Another almost 4.5 million won't get caught up with the AMT. So they'll actually have SALT deductions for the first time. It was zero for them and complicated. It's gone as well, and many small businesses now won't have to keep all those complex depreciation schedules, because now you write off that new equipment, that new technology, that new plant the year you get it. And so we are simplifying the code, and we can always do better.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks both to our witnesses. Yes, sir.
We should probably also mention that the medical expense deduction was not made permanent. It was, what, for 2 years, Kevin?
So the medical expense deduction itself is permanent. We delayed the Obamacare tax increase, though.
Well,
So
we
we
had
keep
an
it
amendment
lower.
to make it permanent, and you guys didn't take that amendment.
Well, you were voting against the bill, so you were voting no against actually doing that. You offered an amendment,
We offered an
but made
amendment
it
to make the
clear,
medical expense permanent.
and then we're
rather than the
voting
2
no
years.
on the bill.
Well.
So you offered an amendment
came
and
up
then
before the bill
voted
came
no.
up. But then,
You can't be too committed to it if you offer an amendment and then vote to kill your own amended bill.
and then, you know, I've looked at the distribution charts on this, and I would have a hard time finding on those charts how someone could get a $1,000 bonus, buy a new car, and remodel their kitchen with this tax cut. So those, American must be paying some pretty good salaries.
Come to Texas.
Yeah. If you lived in Flower Mound, maybe you'd know. So, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Thompson's correct. It is not permanent. It is a 2-year extension.
Yeah.
Again, I reference my political mentor, Johnny Cash, one piece at a time.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
You're welcome.
Gentleman is back time. Thank you very much. Distinguished gentleman from Alabama. This is a great bill. I have no questions about it. Okay, distinguished gentleman from Freedom, Colorado, Mr. Buck. No questions. The gentleman from Boulder, Colorado.
My own amendments later, but I don't have any questions for our excellent, remarkable, talented, and handsome witnesses.
Gentleman is back his time. Mike, I think he
Can
was
I
talking
get
about
that
you
onto
and
the
Kevin.
record a little? Do you mind, Jared?
So there's a record of this. The distinguished gentlewoman from Wyoming.
For the one and only time, I'd like to associate myself with the comments of my colleague from Colorado, Mr. Polis. I have no questions.
Gentlemen, thank you very much for taking time. Mr. Chairman, I know she brought Barbara up with you, and she still takes my calls occasionally. And
Mr.
I want
Chairman.
to thank you for not only your work on this on behalf of all these members, but also your staff.
Thank you.
Your staff takes a lot of, handles a lot of calls to answer a lot of questions, and I'm sure that you and I both know that a professional standard that Mike would have and you would have is essential to the running of the committee, and I want to thank Barbara once again for taking my calls.
We're so proud of Barbara Angus and our tax team.
If you'll please,
for this.
please tell her if you
Amazing.
see her that I appreciate her very much, and I'm sure I'll be calling her tomorrow.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, members.
Thank you very much.
Yes, you bet, Mike. Thank you. Okay, this takes our principals now to give their contributions, and we have members that would wish to take part in their opportunity to address the committee. We have the gentleman from the Ways and Means Committee, the gentleman, Mr. Davis. we have the distinguished gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Garrett Graves, the distinguished gentleman from Iowa, my dear friend Steve King, and the distinguished gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Leonard Lance.
And Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
I want to ask unanimous consent to insert in the record a statement by the Honorable Bill Pasquale of New Jersey.
Without objection, we'll enter Coach Pasquale's information to the record. Thank you very much.
Parks Bill, are you coming? What's that? I said Parks Bill.
Okay, Mr. Polis wants to join us also here. I also note, and I thank the clerk for shutting the door, that we also have Mr. King of Iowa. I would notify if Mr. King's office is listening that we do not see Mr. King yet, Mr. Leonard Lance. I thought I saw him. I thought I saw Mr. King too, but perhaps I'm wrong. So, Gentlemen, we're delighted that you're here. All three of you, including the distinguished gentleman from the Rules Committee, Mr. Polis, know the rules up here, and that is that anything you brought in writing will be entered the record. We want to make sure we get your testimony right, and we appreciate you taking time to not only join us, but the distinguishing remarks that you would choose to make about the economy of the country. We're going to move first to the distinguished gentleman from Colorado, and the gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have three bipartisan proposals that I hope the committee can include in the tax reform package. None of them are strangers to this committee, and while the committee did not include them in the original tax bill, I'm hopeful that we take this opportunity to address these bipartisan concerns of members. The first is for the Kombucha Act, which is identical to the text of the bill, the Keeping Our Manufacturers from Being Unfairly Taxed While Championing Health, or Kombucha Act, and believe me, Mr. Chairman, it wasn't easy to come up with that acronym, is a simple common sense fix to tax code that eases the burden on kombucha manufacturers and unleashes the power of an industry pioneered by small businesses and entrepreneurs, including those in Colorado. As this committee knows, as Mr. Woodall knows all too well, kombucha is a fermented tea rich in probiotics and antioxidants. It's garnered a significant popularity and growth in healthy and organic food circles and has become one of the fastest growing beverage categories in the country. But unfortunately, kombucha manufacturers still have a significant disadvantage from a tax perspective because the products are classified as alcohol products under our tax and regulatory code. But it's not, in fact, alcoholic. The ABV content in the final product is less than 0.5. Like other categories of beverages that do have exemptions, like apple cider, yes, you can leave it out and it can rot and ferment. There is nobody that wants to drink rotten kombucha, nor is it realistic for people to drink rotten cider. While it might technically have an alcohol content, it would also be relatively difficult to digest and disgusting. By taking kombucha out from the under alcohol in the tax and regulatory code, we can really help remove a big tax burden from a growing industry. It's a straightforward amendment. It's taken from a bipartisan bill. It's exactly the type of reform that our small businesses care about. It fixes a problem that Democrats and Republicans, including myself, have identified in the tax code, makes life easier, increases competition. I strongly urge the committee to make in order the Kombucha Act amendment. The second amendment is a cryptocurrency tax fairness amendment, also based on a bipartisan bill I've introduced along with Mr. Schweikert. It's identical, in fact, to the text of the Cryptocurrency Tax Fairness Act. It simply removes outdated restrictions on cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin and other methods of digital payment. It would simply allow consumers to make small purchases of up to $600 of cryptocurrency without having to file burdensome tax requirements with the IRS. When you use Bitcoin to buy coffee, or to crowdfund a startup at $5 or $10 per contribution, you shouldn't have to hire an accountant to file your tax forms at the IRS. This would simply modernize the 2014 IRS decision that classifies cryptocurrencies as property, subject to capital gains tax and reporting requirements, and really put them in with other online payment systems to allow the reuse of these currencies for small purchases. I've also introduced an amendment to protect small businesses and dispensaries in the state of Colorado. from Section 280E of the tax code, which currently penalizes our legal cannabis businesses. In over 40 states, there is some form of economic activity that is legal with regard to cannabis. In my home state, we have a vibrant medical marijuana and commercial marijuana sector. Yet our businesses have been punished by draconian enforcement of Section 280E of the Internal Revenue Code, which prevents deductions for legitimate business expenses like payroll. In effect, there are many companies in our state that are paying an effective federal tax rate as high as 70%. By simply revising Section 280 of the tax code to exempt marijuana sales will help grow small businesses, not just in Colorado, but in over 40 states. Affirm the right to self-determination of our states. We should give all of our businesses the opportunity to succeed, regardless of what people on this committee or in our body feel the legal treatment of marijuana under the law should be. It should not be dealt with as a tax issue. And currently, there are thousands of small businesses in Colorado that are penalized for a legal activity simply because of the industry that they're in. And it's simply unfair, and it must end. Finally, along with my colleague Jackie Rosen, I've introduced an amendment to make the child tax credit fully refundable. It's one of the most effective ways to reduce child poverty. Countless studies have shown the importance of a child's first years to their success. Making the child tax credit fully refundable would help so many families provide for their kids without having to choose between putting food on the table or keeping the lights on. And while recent tax reforms have made changes to the child tax credit, they haven't gone far enough, which is why I've co-sponsored this amendment to make the child tax credit fully refundable to help families and help the next generation. And I'm happy to yield for any questions.
Post, thank you very much. Mr. Davis, welcome to the Rules Committee. Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's an honor to be here and speak in strong support of the Graves and Davis Amendment to H.R. 6757, the Family Savings Act. Our amendment's identical to legislation I've sponsored for the past 3 Congresses, the Social Security Fairness Act. As of today, that legislation, H.R. 1205, has 190 bipartisan co-sponsors, and 6 of those co-sponsors are members of this committee. My bill is also supported by the Senior Citizens League, National Education Association, the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare, the FOP, the Fraternal Order of Police, where I noticed Mr. Hastings asked for a letter to be submitted into the record earlier. Thank you. The National Association of Letter Carriers, International Association of Firefighters, and the National Active and Retired Federal Employees Association. There are few bills in this institution, Mr. Chairman, that enjoy this much support from many members of such a diverse group and a diverse group of members of Congress. For decades, members of Congress on both sides of the aisle have committed to repealing these provisions that unfairly punish America's teachers, first responders, and those who dedicate their lives to public service. And because this Congress has made tax reform a top priority, we have a unique opportunity to fix this. This amendment will move us in the right direction, a direction 190 members of Congress have promised their constituents they want to go. But this amendment is about more than getting rid of bad policy. It's about ensuring a teacher who spends his or her summers working a second job, or a police officer who changes careers after years of service will not face a possible 40% reduction in their Social Security benefits. Our amendment makes sure they get their hard-earned benefits that they paid into. I've heard time and time again from teachers in my district how important this legislation is to them. From a 5th grade teacher, mother of a good friend of mine, Lauren Podlinsick. I was in the other class, so I did not get in trouble with her, Mr. Chairman. But she and Bob Stevenson, former history teacher, and many teachers in my own high school district have talked to me about this issue long before I ever became a member of Congress. And many others have called my office urging us to pass this. Ways and Means actually had a hearing, Mr. Chairman, on this issue in 2016. Let's provide certainty for our teachers, police officers, firefighters, postal workers, and the many others who have dedicated their lives to public service by finally repealing these harmful laws. And I urge my fellow members to join me in supporting this amendment. And I want to thank Chairman Graves for helping to to move this good policy forward too. And I thank you for the opportunity to be here, sir. Yield
Ms.
back.
Davis, thank you very much. Ms. Graves, we're delighted that you're gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to commend Congressman Davis for all the work that he's done on this. As you know, getting 190 bipartisan co-sponsors on legislation is not an easy task, and certainly people aren't doing that because they like Congressman Davis. This is actually very good policy. Mr. Chairman, I want to take a step back and, good friend. I want to take a step back and talk about what this is. This current policy that dates back to the late 1970s actually penalizes public employees, those that have put their lives on the line as police officers, as firefighters, as emergency medical service personnel, those that have put their lives I think, on the line for the future of our children as teachers. I am married to an educator, and for the record, she would not benefit from this amendment. Clearly, our teachers are underpaid. They play such an important role in the future of our country. What's happened is dating back to the late 1970s, early 1980s, there were changes in policy. One of them is called windfall elimination provision. The other one's called the government pension offset. Under the windfall elimination provision, you could actually have your Social Security benefits cut in half. You could have them cut in half. This affects 3.5% of American households. On average, if you're affected by one of these, your Social Security benefits are cut by 1/5. If you're affected by both, your Social Security benefits could be cut by 1/3. So I'll say it again. Mr. Chairman, we are penalizing those public servants that in many cases were underpaid and have put their lives on the line for our communities. This amendment would simply take the text of the Congressman Davis bill, H.R. 1205, which again, 190 bipartisan co-sponsors, one of the easiest amendments we've ever written. We cut and pasted the text. And as per the graphic that I believe you may have, this demonstrates what happens. If someone worked as a security officer and then decided to become a police officer, got the training and became a full-fledged police officer, as you can see, their Social Security benefits would go from nearly $1,800 a month cut down to $800. So once again, penalizing them for being a public employee, for entering public service. Mr. Chairman, being a former state employee myself, who I'll say again, I do not anticipate would profit from this legislation. I can tell you the people that I worked with, they viewed it as mission work. We couldn't afford to pay these people what they deserved. They worked very hard, they were dedicated to the mission, and did extraordinary work in recovering our state from Hurricanes Katrina, Rita, and other disasters. A great group of people. They don't deserve to receive a deduction or reduction in their benefits. The other one, very briefly, is government pension offset. That affects the spouses of deceased public employees and results in a significant reduction in their Social Security benefits. If the death of a spouse wasn't awful enough, we are adding salt to the wound by further reducing the benefits that they would otherwise receive had their spouses not been in public service. So I urge adoption of the amendment. I do want to make note, I believe that we are on in some gray areas in regard to germaneness, but this legislation does affect retirement security, and we believe it's complementary to the bill. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Distinguished gentleman from New Jersey, we're delighted that you're here, Mr. Lance, and thank you for taking time. I know you had been here waiting for us, and we've finally gotten to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman Sessions and Ranking Member McGovern, for allowing me to testify today. I support many of the elements in the tax reform package, lowering rates across the board, reducing our corporate tax rate to compete globally, and certainly I favor doubling the standard deduction and reforming of the alternative minimum tax. But by capping the state and local tax deduction, that has had the effect of tempering some of my constituents' benefits from these tax reforms. I favor the full deductibility of state and local taxes, and that had been in the code since the enactment of the code in 1913. To that end, Mr. Chairman, I have offered an amendment before this distinguished committee to strike the legislative language pertaining to a cap on SALT. New Jersey is a sending state, not a receiving state. We send a great deal more revenue to Washington than we receive back, and I believe in an example of fairness, it would be a much better policy to return the deductibility of SALT to where it was before passage of the legislation last year. I do not believe that we should not recognize the great changes that this committee has made, that the Ways and Means Committee has made regarding the areas where I agree with tax reform. But from the perspective of constituents I serve, I hope that this committee might consider my language striking the legislative language pertaining to a cap on SALT. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Mr. King, we're delighted that you have joined us. We'd like to make room between, I hate to say to separate the brothers over here, but somewhere over here. They've already received the benefit of talking about how handsome they are together. So
I didn't beat any Miss America in my election.
we're delighted that you're here. Mr. Davis, I'm going to need you to stick around since you've given testimony. We're going to, unless you need to go, thank you very much. We'll have you scoot right on up there again if you choose. Mr. King, we're delighted that you're here. Without objection, anything you have in writing will be in the record. Distinguished gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate the instant attention here. I walked in the room and I can focus this thing and make it fairly brief as far as my ask is concerned. And that's this, that I've had a bill before this Congress. Oh, thank you. I've had a bill before this Congress for a number of cycles. And, you know, I've learned that good ideas don't always get traction the first time they float. But it's this, that I've recognized that we have employers in America that are, you know, intentionally hiring illegal employees, and they're deducting the wages and benefits as if it were a legal operation. So I drafted a bill this years ago called the New IDEA Act, and the acronym IDEA stands for the Illegal Deduction Elimination Act. It clarifies that wages and benefits paid to illegals are not deductible for federal income tax purposes. Then it builds a committee between the Social Security Administration, the IRS, and the Department of Homeland Security, a three-way committee, so that each arm of government that's involved in this knows what the other is doing and directs them to work in a cooperative fashion. So when we do this, we also have two different choices here on the amendments. One of them we make E-Verify mandatory, as seems to be the majority opinion within the conference that I'm in. The other one makes it voluntary. But the voluntary one is the one that I introduced from the beginning. And the voluntary E-Verify also gives the employer safe harbor if they use E-Verify. So we cover all of these bases with it. And then we had the benefit of the Center for Immigration Studies do a score on this, and I put that in quotes because they're a respectable outside organization. But the number we have is it generates $254 billion in revenue over 10 years. And so this is the perfect vehicle to offer this amendment to the full body in. And it's awfully hard to get it through committee because there's double jurisdiction. So that's why I haven't had a vote on committee on this in the time that I brought this excellent bill forward. But if we're concerned about the tax cuts being something that accelerates some deficit spending, there are many who believe that the dynamic scoring doesn't live up to the level of getting us to a zero-sum game on this tax cut. This is a generator of, by at least the CIS estimate, of $254 billion over 10 years. So I think it's a very valuable tools for the Congress to consider. It's hard to get it to the floor where we can get it considered. One option is with E-Verify mandatory. The other one is E-Verify voluntary, but safe harbor for using E-Verify. And that concludes my remarks. Appreciate your attention and would hope that the Rules Committee would allow a debate and a vote on such a magnificent bill.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Each of you have come and presented your ideas that I know you not only have vetted and understand, but you believe will make this tax bill better. Mr. King indicated that he had not been to the Ways and Means Committee. Is that what your testimony was, Mr. King?
Made the ask. I haven't had it offered, but I've made the ask. And so we're all busy in this town. I'm not.
Well, I
gonna
don't
comment
think
on-
anybody's complaining, and I do respect exactly what you're saying, and we're delighted that you've come up here, not only to do that, but to make sure consistently that we're listening too, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman Cole?
I appreciate the presentations, but have no questions.
Thank you very much. Mr. McGovern?
I thank you for coming. I support all your amendments except yours, Mr. King. I don't. Anyway, you know, I have a feeling this rule's going to be closed. And I would hope you'd consider voting no on the rule if your amendments are not made in order. But with that, I will yield back my time.
Well, at least one of those people heard that down there, I'm sure, so thank you very much. Distinguished gentleman from Georgia.
No questions, Chairman.
Gentleman does not seek time. Gentleman from Florida, Judge, thank you very much. Dr. Burgess.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can I just ask Mr. King, have you had a hearing on this in the Judiciary Committee?
Not in the last couple cycles that I remember. It's possible that we did have a hearing in previous cycles, but not in any recent time.
But the dual jurisdiction to which you refer is your
Yes.
Committee of Judiciary and Ways and Means?
Dual jurisdiction, and, it really, when I first presented it, I presented it to Karl Rove in the West Wing of the White House, and at a table like this, and I passed it over to him, told him what it did, and I said, this is something that allows the employers to incrementally adjust. If they happen to be 100% employees illegal, they can look at this and they can slowly ratchet themselves into illegal employment. And, I left out one thing too, and it's not going to bring Mr. McGovern in, but it has a 6-year statute of limitations in it. So what it does is you accumulate that liability over that period of time, but it gives you also time to move yourself towards a legal workforce. And it's just hard to get to a level of agreement in the Judiciary Committee to even have this hearing, because I'm not willing to go along with amnesty, so I don't want to have anything attached to my bill. That's one of the reasons I haven't brought it forward. If it comes clean, this is something that restores the rule of law, and it will go further about than cleaning up the illegal labor force in America than anything I can think of. It is superior. I like the E-Verify legislation, but it's superior in its result to E-Verify.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
Thank you, gentlemen. Gentleman from Florida. No questions. Gentleman from Alabama. I have no questions. The gentlelady from Wyoming. We appreciate your testimony, and our friends are excused, and hopefully Mr. Polis will join us back at the dais. Is the rule ready?
I don't know if you've seen these, but for once, they read the rule and talk about there's 3 more closed rules, and now we're at 101.
So is this the same one?
Before, I guess, did they already give it to
Okay,
you?
yeah, that's fine. Okay.
Okay.
I have every confidence, and I know you're up to it. Sure. Do you want us to go ahead and call for the motion? Call for the motion? Okay.
Adoption of the bill as amended shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in the bill as amended. The rule provides one motion to recommit with or without instruction. The rule provides that the yeas and nays shall be considered as ordered on the question of passage, and that Clause 5B of Rule 21 shall not apply to the bill or amendments thereto. Section 4 of the rule provides that that on any legislative day during the period of October 1, 2018 through November 12, 2018, the journal of the proceedings of the previous day shall be considered as approved. The chair may at any time declare the House adjourned to meet at a date and time to be announced by the chair in declaring the adjournment. Section 5 of the rule provides that the Speaker may appoint members to perform duties of the chair for the duration of the period addressed by Section 4. Section 6 of the rule provides that each day during the period addressed by Section 4 of the resolution shall not constitute calendar days for the purpose of Section 7 of the War Powers Resolution. Section 7 of the rule provides that each day during the period addressed by Section 4 of the resolution shall not constitute a legislative day for purposes of Clause 7 of Rule 13. Finally, Section 8 of the rule provides that each day during the period addressed by Section 4 of the resolution shall not constitute a calendar day or legislative day for purposes of Clause 7C1 of Rule 22.
Thank you, gentlemen. We're now open for discussion or amendment.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, we have a few amendments, but I think I'll do them on block. So I have an amendment to the rule to move the committee make an order. Chairman Brady's manager amendment to H.R. 6760, amendment number 6, is a standalone amendment rather than self-executing it. Instead of Chairman Brady waving his magic wand, the whole House should vote on whether or not to pretend this deficit-exploding bill has no cost. I have another amendment to the rule. I move the committee make an order and give the necessary waivers for the amendment to H.R. 6757 by Representative Graves, number 2, that would repeal the windfall elimination provision and the government pension offset provision. And then I have another amendment the rule. I move the committee make an order and give the necessary waivers for the amendment offered by Representative Pascrell to H.R. 6760, number 5, which repeals the $10,000 limit on state and local tax deduction.
Yeah, if I may, just point of inquiry, is the gentleman offering all three
together.
amendments collectively?
We'll do them collectively. It'll save time. Yeah.
Appreciate that very much. Gentleman's amendment is open for discussion. Seeing no discussion, call for the vote. Those in favor of the gentleman's amendment say yea.
Yay.
Those opposed, nay. Appears the nays have it.
Ask for a roll call on that.
Gentleman's asked for roll call.
Mr. Sessions. Mr. Woodall.
No.
Mr. Woodall, no. Mr. Burgess. No. Mr. Burgess, no. Mr. Collins. Mr. Byrne. Mr. Byrne, no. Mr. Newhouse. Mr. Newhouse, no. Mr. Buck. Ms. Cheney. Ms. Cheney, no. Mr. McGovern.
Yes.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Mr. Hastings. Mr. Hastings, aye. Mr. Polis. Mr. Polis, aye. Mrs. Torres. Mr. Chairman.
No. Has the gentleman from Texas had an opportunity to register his vote?
I have not. I would request to be a no.
Mr. Sessions, no. Mr. Chairman.
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Well,
The clerk will tally.
3 nays, 3 yeas, 7 nays.
Amendment's not agreed to.
Mr. Chairman, I just have I want to make a comment if I could. Yeah, Mr. Chairman, this is really a dark day for this institutions. Republicans broke the closed rule record earlier this year, but with the passage of these rules tonight, Republicans on this committee have now pushed 101 closed rules so far in this Congress. Think about that, 101. We're not up here on our side calling for an open rule on every bill. In fact, this year we have only asked for 2 completely open rules, just twice. What we are asking for is a legitimate debate on legitimate ideas, and very frankly, we have not had that. And there is no justification for more than 100 closed rules in a single Congress. Members, Democrats and Republicans, are fed up with how this place is run, and the public is too. It's past time for real debates and a more legitimate and accommodating process. So, Mr. Chairman, if you think there is a good defense for issuing over 100 closed rules, then, you're entitled to your opinion. But I have yet to hear a good rationale for shutting down the process so dramatically. And it's not just the closed rules. I mean, as we heard tonight on this tax bill, the Ways and Means Committee didn't even do a hearing on the bill. So we need to get back to a process where the Rules Committee is more accommodating, but also where committees actually do their jobs and do their work. I think Democrats and Republicans would prefer that. We've had too many bills that have come up here that have had no hearings, and in some cases, no hearings or no markups. People fight to get on committees because they want to develop an expertise on a particular subject. It must be frustrating to both Democrats and Republicans when they're cut out of the process. So I just point this out because we've reached this new goalpost of 101 closed rules, and I think it ought to be noted for the record. So I wanted to make that statement, and happy to engage you or yield back, whatever you want.
Well, I'd be glad to engage you. I think the gentleman knows that we had a number, somewhere between 16 to 24 bills that were under the law that had been written by Democrats, that we went and looked at rules and regulations.
Are these the CRA bills?
They would be
Yeah,
CRAs.
but there was no reason to close them. I mean, they could have
And
been
it was either
They could have been modified, they could have
Well,
been
I think-
structured.
it was either a yes or a no.
Well,
either
or we
yes
could have
or no.
improved them.
Well, what I'm suggesting is there was, as you have already alluded to, there was really no need or necessity except that it got the process done very quickly in days when we needed to get out of here, when we needed to be able to do those things. But there was in essence, no consequence to that. We were going to do the CRAs. It was an existing law. And so there was 14, 15, or
Well, there was a
24
consequence.
of those.
Members who may have wanted to offer amendments to adjust those rules were not allowed to.
So it was
offer those
a yes or a no. You can't change, we were doing away with the law.
right, well-
You either do away with the law or you don't do away with the law, because they were designed as rules by the administration.
I know you could have done away with them, but we could have amended them. That's what I'm simply saying. So,
Well, so all I'm suggesting to you is that I do understand frustrations. I understood the frustration when I sat and listened to the Affordable Care Act, and I do know that. But I think that we're taking responsibility for what we've done. And this tax bill, I do know that there's a disagreement about it. I do recognize that, for instance, Judge Hastings said nobody from his district had said anything favorable about it. Yet every one of us have found someone that was overwhelmingly, the stock market, the number of people employed, our GDP, overwhelming evidence. So
you know,
that's,
and Mr. Chairman, we have legitimate policy disagreements.
we do.
Yeah, so that's not what I'm
Well, but
griping
it's a
about.
tax
I'm
bill,
I'm
and
just
because
griping
we've
about
done
the
so many
fact that
tax bills,
people-
that's why there's closed.
Yeah, but with no hearings on the bill. And I think that's a problem. All I'm simply saying, and take it for what it's worth, that I think it's not only Democrats, but I think there are a number of Republicans who do not like the way this House is being run and the process. And, no matter what happens in November, I think it is incumbent upon you, if you are still chairman, or whoever is chairman,
Yes, sir.
to take that into account, because I do think things have to change. This is not the way the House should be run, and it's become too easy and too convenient to shut the whole process down and to bypass committee, and I think that that's wrong.
So let me find common ground with you. I agree with much of what you've said. It makes it easier for me when I know that there has been a hearing, when I do know that we have followed those things. It does make it easier. And I would hope and wish and want every single time that we came up here that our members had an opportunity to vet that somewhere else. But that is not always the way it works, and I am not trying to point a finger, simply to agree with you. And so I do hope this next Congress, whoever's in charge, would have an opportunity to recognize that's something you feel very strongly about, and I do too. And I will take that up, and I would expect a change, and I think it's only fair.
All right, thank you.
So I think that I did hear you. I think I do recognize the common ground, and perhaps as much as you would want that, you heard me say I do too. Anything further from the distinguished gentleman?
I would only say that you have more power than I do
Well,
to fix it right now. And you can say we're not going to take these bills up unless committees of jurisdiction actually did their work. But that's, you know, but thank you. I yield back.
Does the gentleman, is there any amendment that is on the table at this time? I do not hear one. I do hear the distinguished gentleman from Colorado would now be.
Yeah, if my colleagues didn't have amendments. Okay, thank you. Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment to the rule. I move the committee make an order and give the necessary waivers for the following amendments to H.R. 6760, numbers 8, 9, 10, and 12. These happen to be the same four that I hopefully successfully attempted to sway the committee to include during my compelling testimony. Amendment 8 would provide a de minimis exemption for cryptocurrency and Bitcoin transactions and to prevent costly reporting for transactions under $600. Amendment number 9 would exempt legal cannabis businesses from onerous Section 280E of the Federal Tax Code that forces them to pay a rate of up to 70%. Amendment 10 would eliminate the applied federal alcohol tax on kombucha. And number 12 would make the child tax credit fully refundable, along with Mrs. Rosen. Again, these four, regardless of the members of this committee that may fall on either side, I hope would at least be allowed for a vote. I think we would have the votes on these. I don't think the bipartisan kombucha one or the cryptocurrency one are at all controversial. I think the cannabis one deserves a floor vote. I think it has the votes to pass. Over 40 states have some form of legal or medicinal cannabis that this would affect the taxation of small businesses by reducing, preventing them from paying rates of up to 70%, and then making the child tax credit fully refundable would really help families, putting families really first with regard to who we're helping with regard to these tax provisions. So I would encourage the committee to allow an open floor vote on these four amendments with sufficient time on both sides to allow members to make the case, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. Is there discussion? I have one question. Could you tell me about the child tax credit? Is that unlimited for any child?
So this is for families up to a certain income level. What the change would be is to make it fully refundable instead of partially refundable. I worked with Ms. Rosen on this amendment. It's proven to be an effective way in a number of studies to reduce childhood poverty. If we make it fully refundable, it would help many working families be able to provide for their kids and not have to choose between rent and food and other
What is
issues
that
they face.
level of income, please, sir?
I don't know if this has been scored. We just introduced this as an amendment.
Was scored or not? What?
I believe the level of income will depend on the size of the family and other factors that are often considered in these calculations.
Okay, thank you very much. All right. Vote will now be on the post amendment. Those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no? No. Noes have it, noes have it. Roll call, please. Gentlemen, that's for a roll call vote. Clerk will poll the committee.
Mr. Cole? No. Mr. Cole? No. Mr. Whittle? Mr. Whittle? No. Mr. Burgess? Mr. Burgess? No. Mr. Collins? Mr. Byrne? Mr. Byrne? No. Mr. Newhouse? No. Mr. Newhouse? No. Mr. Buck? Ms. Cheney? Ms. Cheney? No. Mr. McGovern? Aye. Mr. McGovern? Aye. Mr. Hastings? Mr. Hastings? Aye. Mr. Polis? Aye. Mr. Polis? Aye. Mrs. Torres? Mr. Chairman?
No.
Mr. Chairman? No.
Clerk will report the total.
3 yeas, 7 nays.
The amendment's not agreed to. For the amendment or discussion, seeing none, the vote now be on the motion from the distinguished gentleman from Georgia. Those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. The ayes have it, the ayes have it. Gentleman asked for roll call vote. Clerk will poll the committee.
Mr. Cole? Yes. Mr. Cole? Aye. Mr. Whittle? Mr. Whittle? Aye. Mr. Burgess? Mr. Burgess? Aye. Mr. Collins? Mr. Byrne? Mr. Byrne? Aye. Mr. Newhouse? Aye. Mr. Newhouse? Aye. Mr. Buck? Ms. Cheney? Ms. Cheney? Aye. Mr. McGovern? No. Mr. McGovern? No. Mr. Hastings? No. Mr. Hastings? No. Mr. Polis? No. Mr. Polis? No. Mrs. Torres? Mr. Chairman?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman? Aye.
Clerk will report the total.
7 yeas, 3 nays.
The motion is agreed to. Accordingly, I will be handling this for the Republicans.
And I'll handle it for the Democrats.
And Mr. McGovern will handle this for Democrats. Judge, do you have any question as we, yes, sir. Judge, in fact, as you suggest, there are no additional meetings scheduled at this time, so it means that we have completed our work that we are aware of, and thank you very much. I want to thank everyone for not only your attention to detail, but for taking time to be here today. We've completed our work. Thank you.